DanBailey has really become, I think, the convener in the community. His integrity, his reputation, his intelligence, his dedication to the community, nonprofits, the business world, the chamber, and so forth. He's just been a solid, steadying hand in a number of community issues.
I've known him since 1963 when we were both at Sarasota High School together. And he was an all-around guy then, and he's an all-around gentleman now.
His mother always said that DanBailey was just born a good baby, as the nurses told her also. Dan actually is quite a talker. In fact, he was talking well before he was walking, because he's always about connecting with other people. In fact, his mom called him Angel because he was such a good baby.
Charles Daniel DanBailey Jr. was born in Jacksonville, Florida on April 15, 1946. The middle child of 3 children born to Audrey and Charles Daniel Bailey Sr., a sister, Martha, 2.5 years his senior, and a brother, Kenneth, 3.5 years younger. Dan is a 6th-generation Floridian.
My family is from North Florida. My mother's family is from around Gainesville. My father's family is from the Panhandle, west of Tallahassee. Both families had been there since the early 1800s.
Dan's family lived in Altha, a small community in the Florida Panhandle, until he was a year old, when the family moved to Jacksonville. His father was a banker who moved throughout the state as he advanced his career. Just before his 4th birthday, they moved to Miami.
We were in Coral Gables initially, and then we moved to North Miami and then to Miami Shores. So I went to 2 different elementary schools. My father became quite prominent down there. He was mayor of Miami Shores, which is a relatively small municipality in Dade County.
Dan's father impressed upon him the importance of education and of hard work at a very early age.
The yard was my responsibility. I can still remember we had a vacant lot next to us in Miami, and it was our lot, part of our yard. And it was enormous, and every Saturday we spent a good bit of time out there pulling weeds and, cutting bushes and whatever. So he taught me the value of work and expected me to work like he did, and he worked right up to the end of his life.
His mother was a homemaker who provided the family a loving foundation.
She was a wonderful mother for the 3 of us children, and she was, I think, a good companion to my father from the standpoint of he had to be out quite a bit, socializing and, with customers, and she was a good sport about all that.
At that time, Dan was interested in art. He enjoyed drawing figures of Abraham Lincoln, as well as other notables, using whatever medium he could find.
Papers seemed to be kind of scarce, and I can still remember every Saturday morning, my dad used to get his shirts back from the cleaners, folded up, and there'd be a piece of cardboard in there keeping it in place. And I would collect those cardboards and draw on them. I'd be up Saturday morning drawing sketches on those discarded pieces of cardboard.
In 1957, when Dan was in the 6th grade, the family moved to Sarasota, where they took up permanent residency.
I was looking forward to moving from Miami to Sarasota, though I'd never been here, because I'd heard about the circus being here. And I'd heard about the Red Sox at the time were here, Ted Williams. I'd heard about Ringling College, Ringling School of Art at the time, being here. And I liked to sketch, and I thought, art would be something that I might want to pursue.
In Sarasota, Dan attended Southside Elementary School for the last part of 6th grade, and then entered Brookside Junior High School.
I was on the track team. I was a high jumper. I was on the basketball team. I wasn't very good, but I was tall.
Sarasota was a quiet community, much different than the Miami area the family had left.
One of my first recollections was going over the first Ringling Bridge, the wooden bridge that was built by Owen Burns and John Ringling, and hearing the badoop, badoop, badoop going over the wooden planks.
Dan and his family lived in a home on Blue Heron Drive in the Paradise Shores subdivision, what was then the south side of Sarasota near Sarasota Bay. When he was around 12 years old, his parents helped him acquire a boat, which opened up the natural habitats of the area to him.
It was an 8-foot pram, It had a microscopic outboard motor on it, 2.5 horsepower, and I could explore all the areas of the bay near our house, and all on my own. It gave me a great sense of independence. I could ride my bike to what's now Southside Village, Southside Drugs. You could get a cherry Coke or a vanilla Coke. I could go down, they had a sporting goods store down there, barber shop. All this I could do on my own.
At Brookside Junior High, Dan was involved in academic exercises as well as his athletics.
The state science fair was in Gainesville one year, and Dan and I were in a science class together, Mr. Harrington, somebody at Brookside, and I don't remember, we came up with a project, and we got on the bus. Our parents trusted enough in us to get on the bus, and as you can see, we were in coat and tie at that time, and we went up to Gainesville, stayed with his aunt up there, and participated in the science fair, which is probably as close as we've ever come to science since.
Dan entered Sarasota High School and continued with his athletic pursuits.
I was still tall, and I was on the JV basketball team. But then the other boys started growing too. And so my last 2 years I didn't play varsity basketball. I was on the track team, and I was a good high jumper. I was 5th in the state one year.
Besides his sports endeavors, Dan worked at being a good student.
I was interested in the courses that interested me, science, a little art, history. I wasn't particularly good in math. Had a little trouble with algebra, 1 and 2, 1 at Brookside, 2 at Sarasota High. But ironically, I got pretty good at it before I got out of there. I think my brain was beginning to develop a little bit better, and I enjoyed trigonometry and analytical geometry and that sort of thing.
While the circus had moved from Sarasota to Venice by the time his family had come to Sarasota, Dan was able to meet many of the performers' children who attended Sarasota High School and performed in the Sailor Circus.
All the families that you know of in Sarasota, the well-known families, were represented in our class. And virtually all of them are good athletes. And they could create an act in a New York second. A new act, whether it be juggling or doing a backflip on a loose wire. The Sailor Circus at that time was part of our high school. It was an activity limited to Sarasota High School. So my junior year girlfriend was on the flying trapeze, and she was a flyer on the trapeze. So I went to a lot of student circus performances, and Loyals and Royals and all those well-known circus families were in my classes.
Dan was a popular student. In fact, he was so popular, he was chosen by the Keyettes to be their senior sweetheart.
Which was kind of ironic because my grade point average was not high enough to qualify me to be in the Key Club, the boys' counterpart for that. So that was a little embarrassing. I was sitting in the gymnasium one day, and they had some kind of big program, and I wasn't paying attention to it. And they called out my name and announced that I had been selected as sweetheart. It didn't mean much, quite frankly. They didn't invite me to any of their meetings.
Even then, Dan was a kind young man. No matter how popular he was, he would make a point to befriend those less popular or new to the school.
He was a senior notable. He was voted best looking in the class, but he could have been voted best all around. He could have been voted most popular. He was just an all-around likable guy. And 63, 64, when I went there, that was my senior year and only year at Sarasota High School. So it really meant a lot to me to be befriended by somebody like DanBailey.
High school can be very cliquish. You've got the jocks, you got the preppies, you got the agricultural guys, the farmers, and sometimes they don't relate to each other. Dan related to everybody. He was very kind, and I don't think you could ever say Dan ever said a bad thing about any of them. And he crossed over all sorts of economic levels. He didn't care if you were poor or rich. He looked at the quality of the person.
While a senior in high school, Dan worked for Land O'Sun Dairy, located in downtown Sarasota, bottling milk and then making deliveries to local stores.
It was hard work. Bottling, basically it was a co-op, and they took in the milk from all the area dairy farms, Manatee and Sarasota, DeSoto County, I guess.
As Dan was considering what to do after high school, John Binns, the manager of the dairy and a city commissioner who was mayor of Sarasota in 1961, suggested he consider Mercer University, a Baptist college in Macon, Georgia.
And he also went to my church. And he had gone to Mercer. And his son, Steve, was my best friend. He went to Mercer, and several other guys from Sarasota High School the year before me. So I applied to Mercer. That's the only place I applied. I went to Mercer. I had never been there until my parents took me up there and dropped me off.
At Mercer, Dan became involved in his fraternity.
I was active in my fraternity, Sigma Nu, and I became the president of the fraternity. We called it commander.
His father, a World War II veteran, insisted Dan become a part of the ROTC program.
But he said, "You're going to go into ROTC." I said, "Yes, sir, sir." I did, and my brother behind me did the same. So I went through 4 years of ROTC while I was going through college, and it was a little bit inconvenient. Had to go to Fort Bragg one summer. But it was not good advice he gave me. It was more of an instruction, but it was very sagacious, you might say.
During summers, Dan would return to Sarasota, where he worked to help with his expenses.
I had a number of interesting character-building summer jobs, most of them around construction or factory work. I built ladders up near the airport. I worked in the ice house up in Newtown area. Worked at Moss Brothers for John Schaub, who was the manager there for so many years. I worked out on the beach building a condo 2 summers in a row. I say building. I was a carpenter's helper.
Mercer was a small college of 1,700 students. There, Dan began to develop his interest in helping others.
What they did was build good citizens and to be engaged in the world around you and leadership. And I think that was part of my ROTC training as well.
It was also at Mercer, his very first night during freshman orientation, that a young co-ed named Nancy Smith caught his eye.
I looked across the cafeteria and said, "Wow, look at that."
I was charmed. He was very friendly and very easy to talk to, and just a good foundation for friendship that began then.
We didn't really get together other than being friends until she actually became our fraternity sweetheart. And then we started dating in our senior year.
Their senior year at Mercer, Dan proposed.
It was fairly romantic. We met in Thomasville, Georgia for a wedding, and in a box of long stem red roses was a beautiful engagement ring. So it wasn't that he was down on one knee to give the ring to me, but it was a beautiful proposal.
We were in Thomasville, Georgia at a wedding of a friend, a fraternity brother, and I offered the ring and she accepted it. And it was no surprise, but we both knew, we were in love. And that was a long time ago.
They graduated from Mercer in 1968, Dan with a major in history and minors in political science and journalism, and Nancy with a degree in education. Shortly after, they were married in a small ceremony at Nancy's parents' home in East Point, Georgia.
Very small, intimate wedding. It was very meaningful. The minister was very close to me as I grew up and made it a very special, meaningful ceremony for us.
It was just what we wanted. Neither one of us would want a big wedding. My mother and father eloped. So we're not really big wedding people, and so that worked out great.
They returned to Mercer and took up residence in the married housing of the school. Nancy began teaching, while at the suggestion of his father, Dan entered law school at Mercer.
He was a prominent banker in town and had a lot of customers and friends who were lawyers. And he just thought that would be a natural thing for me, and he encouraged me to do it. So I went ahead and applied. I think I applied only to Mercer Law School and was able to get in.
Dan graduated from the Walter F. George School of Law at Mercer in 1971 with a Juris Doctor. As a lieutenant in the Army, he was committed to serving his commission. He was accepted into the Army JAG Corps and prepared to fulfill his duty.
I could not go on active duty until I took the bar, passed the bar, and then got into the next available class at the University of Virginia for JAG.
Dan and Nancy, along with son Charlie, who was born while Dan was in law school, returned to Sarasota. Dan accepted a position with Nelson, Stinnett, Surface, Corp, and Payne. Among other clients, the firm represented Sarasota County.
It was Dick Nelson, a very prominent lawyer in town, and I was with his firm. And so I was practicing here, getting other judges and doing a little bit of everything.
A year into his practice, he was called to active duty. However, by this time the Vietnam War was winding down, and the military determined they did not have a need for a large JAG contingency.
I got orders saying that they didn't have a need for me to go in for 4 years to JAG, that I could just do my training in my assigned branch, which was military intelligence, which really required that I go to infantry school. So I went to infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. By that time, our son had already been born. Charlie, he was about 3. We already owned a house here in Sarasota. And so I did that stint. And then I was able to come back to Sarasota and resume my practice.
Dan remained in the Army Reserve and was honorably discharged in 1976 at the rank of captain. In Sarasota, he continued to develop his practice.
I did the usual grab bag of everything that anybody needed doing, like examine titles, go over and handle a plea at criminal court, handle a bankruptcy in Tampa, take depositions, research issues about easements. I actually got a good bit of trial experience initially. I representing the county, I handled several condemnation cases which involved 12-person juries, which is a pretty big deal because the only time you impound 12 people for a jury is when you're going to take their life or take their property. So I had a good bit of experience the first few years, just being thrown in the pit and having to try cases, handle divorces and that kind of thing.
In 1975, he joined the firm of Williams, Parker, Harrison, Dietz, and Getson. Here, he discovered the area of law that would shape his career.
And I continued to handle some litigation, commercial litigation, etc. I can't say I really enjoyed that much because I'm not really confrontational. And sometimes your opponent would be a little confrontational over little things like when we're going to have the deposition, where we're going to have the deposition, all those kinds of things. I didn't really enjoy that much. About that time, one of our senior partners, George Dietz, needed some help in handling rezonings and that sort of thing with city and county commissions. So they asked me to get involved. So I jumped in and started doing hearings before the County Commission, City Commission on land use matters. And that's essentially what I've done since then, although I also became the attorney for the Sarasota Manatee Airport Authority, the operator of the Sarasota Bar International Airport, and I've done that for about 31 years.
Along with representing the Sarasota Airport as general counsel, he was general counsel to Karen Rushing, the clerk of court, and primary counsel to the Sarasota Public Hospital Board. Additionally, throughout his career, Dan represented several high-profile public organizations. He served on the Police Foundation and the advisory board to the Sarasota City Commission, including a panel regarding the expansion of central wastewater facilities and runoff into Sarasota Bay. While establishing his professional career, Dan also became deeply involved in serving nonprofit organizations in the community, beginning with the Big Brother organization in 1977, where he served as a Big Brother. Since then, he has provided his expertise and guidance to countless nonprofit organizations.
He was the founding chairman of SCOPE. SCOPE was barely an idea in people's minds. Sarasota County openly plans for excellence. What does that stand for? But Dan said, no, that's about the future. It's about excellence. It's about bringing people together from all sectors. So I think we should give it a try. And so he did, and to this day, around the nation, when I go and fortunate to present or give speeches and talk about scope, people will say, ooh, how do we get one of those in our community? So Dan is willing to step out on new, important, positive things.
He served on so many boards, so many charitable boards and foundations. He's a true asset to the community. And he also does pro bono work, which I think he doesn't get enough credit for.
As an attorney, of course, he's probably one of the few that has done so remarkably well in the community. He's just well thought of by everyone.
Dan credits much of his involvement in giving back to the community to his father, Charles Bailey Sr., who had been a notable banker in Sarasota and headed the United Way, then known as the Community Chest, as well as many other organizations serving Sarasota.
My father set the standard that I had to uphold, and he unfortunately passed away at a relatively young age with his boots on. He was 61 years old, still practicing, still at the bank. He set the standard high, and yet it seemed like his life was somewhat unfinished. It was over before it was really finished. And so I started trying to trace his steps where he had been and maybe even expand on it a little bit.
While Dan is devoted to his community, he is equally devoted to his family. Son Charles, Charlie, Daniel Bailey III, was born in 1969. 4 years later, Ashley in 1973. 4 years later, Patricia in 1977, and then 6 years later, Jessica in 1983.
Nancy used to joke that we were teaching one child to drive while we're teaching the other one to walk, and we were shopping preschools and colleges at the same time. Charlie, being 14 years older than Jessica, brought a date to see his baby sister in the nursery at Sarasota Memorial Hospital.
Our living room was romper room. He's the one that taught them how to ride their bikes and swim, and was definitely the patient person that taught them how to drive a car. That was a huge responsibility, so very hands-on. That was quite a priority for him.
I would always have people ask me, you know, boy, your dad is so busy. I see him at city commission meetings, county commission meetings, he's active in church. And it didn't, as a kid, it never seemed that way to me. He always somehow miraculously had time for me. To my knowledge, I don't ever recall him missing a Little League baseball game, a Ringling Redskin football game, a school event, or anything.
During the summers, he would get home from work and jump in the pool with us and let me bury him in the sand at the beach. And on the weekends, he would go for his 8-mile jogs and then go get us donuts. And he was just always spoiling us.
Memories of him teaching me how to ride a bicycle, a very 70s era yellow Schwinn Stingray with a banana seat. I never had training wheels. He held onto the back of my bike and ran probably 3 or 4 miles and taught me how to ride a bike in the course of a weekend, throwing me ground ball after ground ball after ground ball as I was practicing for my Little League tryout.
He was a great dad that instilled a lot of wisdom and values, not so much by preaching them, but by living them. I mean, it was always clear through his actions how to treat people. He always gave people the benefit of the doubt, and it would come as no surprise to those that know him that he kind of lived by the golden rule. And again, he did not have to preach it rather, but lived it.
He's got patience, the patience of Job. I mean, there are many, many, many times when he probably should have swatted me good and didn't. All he had to do was give you a look and tell you he was disappointed in you and he expected more of you, and that's all it took.
Dan's devotion to family and community is above all a reflection of his devotion to God and his faith in a higher power.
Faith is very, very important to him, and I think it grounds his life, not only in his practice of law here and in all the other social and civic causes that he's a part of, even in his education. He was educated in an institution that takes faith seriously. And so whether it be his intellect, whether it be his legal abilities, capabilities, whether it's just being a participant or a citizen. His faith in the Lord informs just about everything about him, what's fair, what's right, what's noble, and what's virtuous.
Has truly led all his life like a true Christian gentleman. You know, you would be hard-pressed to find somebody to say something negative about him.
I have a strong faith. I'm a member of my church, First Baptist Church, which I've been a member of since 1958. So I think God plays a major role in my life. But in terms of precepts for dealing with my fellow man, there are basically two of them. One of them is that I will never burn bridges with people. I don't care how they've offended me. I may need to prevail upon that person at some point in the future for something he or she needs or something that I need. So I avoid burning bridges with people. And the second thing is I try to be forgiving of people. If I find their behavior odd or offensive, I try to be understanding of it because I recognize they're one of God's children too. And they may not have had the advantages in their life that I've had in my life.
While Dan is slow to accept praise for his accomplishments and gives credit to those who came before him, his true reason for his giving spirit is simple and heartfelt.
I love people.
We ask DanBailey his advice for those who follow.
I read recently the words of Mother Teresa that she had carved on the wall in her hospital in Calcutta, and I can't quote it from memory, but essentially it was, sometimes people will be mean to you, but forgive them anyway. And sometimes people will not appreciate what you've done for them. Do it anyway.